Stuff Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, May 7th, 2013. Getting into the week. Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, today, the condensation process in the corporate media is just running rock and roll, full tilt, boogie, afterburner, overdrive here. And the news is obsessing about this story coming out of Ohio, where these three women who were missing for 10 years and presumed dead have been found alive about 2 miles away from where they were kidnapped, abducted. And they're having this big thing. The police are up there in their press conference saying they've arrested these three brothers who abducted these women 10 years ago and kept them prisoner, apparently raped them. One of the women has a 6-year-old baby, courtesy of one of the abductors. And they're acting like a real big deal. We've arrested these guys and justice has triumphed. And when I read this story, when I listen to this story, the first thing that occurs to me, what a shame these three women were not carrying firearms when they met their abductors. Now, these three women are identified as Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight, and they've now been sent home to their families. And I'm sure they're having a real good homecoming and welcome, and well, they should. But I'm not kidding about them having guns that would have thwarted the crime in progress, because the corporate media is going on like this is some kind of a success story. But it isn't. Even as the police pose for the news cameras and talk of arresting the abductors, the fact is that for 10 years, the police failed to locate these women held only 2 miles away from where they were abducted. And the police did not find these women. One of them, Amanda, finally managed to escape with the assistance of a neighbor. And then she ran and called 911, and the police are sitting there, oh, here's a wonderful opportunity for a new press conference, and we can stand there in our nice uniforms and our shiny badges and act like we're relevant to the process. And this case is a reminder to us all. The police cannot, will not, and do not protect Americans from crime, even as the government screams that we should all turn in all of our guns and rely on those same ineffective police for protection. And the courts have ruled repeatedly. The police are under no obligation to come to the assistance of somebody who's the victim of violent crime. There was this landmark lawsuit out of Washington, D.C. 3 women were sharing this Georgetown townhouse. 2 women were upstairs, heard people breaking in and raping the woman who was downstairs, called the cops. Cops said, we're coming, we're coming, we're coming, we're coming. Finally, the ruckus downstairs went quiet. The 2 women upstairs presumed the police had arrived, walked down, walked right into, this rape in progress. They were taken prisoner, tied up, forced to perform sex acts on each other, for the jollies of the rapist. The police never showed up. And the women sued the police, and the court said, nah, police don't have to show up. And that's the reality right now. We, the American people, justly fear criminals, like these bozos who kidnapped these 3 women and held them for 10 years. Under the Second Amendment, we have a right to keep and bear arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals, including those military-style weapons given to the drug gangs by the United States government's own Fast and Furious operation. You paid for all those guns. You're paying for guns to be given to drug gangs. At the same time, you're told you may not buy those same guns for yourself. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about this epic police fail in Ohio. These 3 girls were abducted, held prisoner in a house only 2 miles away from where they were abducted. Apparently, the police actually did talk to one of these men and didn't twig on to the fact that this was the guy. They let him go. And it is a reminder, the police are not going to protect you from violent crime. You have a legitimate right to defend yourself with force of arms. And the reality is, we should be framing the gun debate solely in terms of our right to be secure in our homes against intruders, against criminals. And there's this another story coming out of Trenton, New Jersey. Apparently on Sunday, somebody broke into the home of Dan Dodson and his wife. Dan Dodson was basically fighting this guy, this intruder, for 30 minutes before the police showed up in response to the 911 call. 30 minutes. And so the government is trying to say, you don't need guns, the police will take care of you. And I can just see, some guy, confronted with an intruder in his home saying, sorry, Mr. Rapist, I gave up my gun so the police can protect me, but they're a little backlogged tonight. Can you wait about 20 minutes to shove that diseased schlong into my daughter so the police can get here first? A lot can happen in 30 minutes. By the time 30 minutes is there, whatever's going to happen is over and done with. You're robbed, you're raped, you're dead. And that is the reality. And we need to take the gun debate away from resistance to tyranny, which is what the government has all got their knickers in a twist about anyway. And we need to say, under the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America, we the people have a legitimate and necessary right to keep and bear arms equal to, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. And the criminals have got all these military-style rifles that the U.S. government spent your tax money on to give to the drug gangs in Operation Fast and Furious. As long as we frame the gun debate in that context, we have a right to protect ourselves from crime in a nation where the police are completely ineffective. There's no counter-argument. They can't come back and say, oh yeah, you can surrender your guns, the police will be there. Demonstrably they won't. 10 years taken out of these girls' lives. The police even talked to one of the suspects they just arrested and let him go. Is that not absurd? Now, of course, the corporate media, this is pretty much all they're talking about today, because they don't want you paying attention to what's going over there in Syria. And we're hearing that Turkey is now staging drills along that Syrian border. So they're starting to rattle their sabers good and hard. Or is that scimitars, that part of the world here? I want to remind everybody that the United Nations' own investigation has shown that it is the Syrian rebels, the hired mercenaries, who are using sarin gas on the civilians of Syria in order to frame Assad for it. And the United Nations is seeing through this fraud. Not surprisingly, the White House has come out saying, we're skeptical of this. The Syrian rebels would never do anything like that. They're the good guys. That's why we give them money and weapons. And so the White House is basically raising on a busted flush. They're out there saying, oh, we find it, if chemical weapons were used, it had to be by Assad. They're still pushing that piece of propaganda. What are they going to do? Say, hey, you caught us. We were lying. So they're kind of stuck with that lie. They're going to have to keep going on that one. Israel is out there, saying that they're bombing Syria in order to bring about peace. Yeah, really. Now, here is the definition of chutzpah for today. The IDF has now formally complained to the United Nations over those mortar shells that came out of Syria and landed on the Golan Heights. The IDF is saying, well, the Golan Heights are effectively part of Israel now. It's not just occupied territory, it's Israeli territory. They're already handing out oil exploration deals on that land that does not belong to Israel. So Israel, after multiple bombings into Damascus, killing civilians, blowing up that chicken ranch, all that other stuff going on, they have the chutzpah to go to the United Nations and complain about 2 Syrian mortar shells, which even Israel says appear to have accidentally come across the border. Now that is chutzpah. Now, a long, long time ago, in a kidding, joking mood, in response to the usual flood of propaganda that hits the American media anytime Israel does something that they need political cover for. We'll see, all of the movies about Hitler and Nazis and World War II that we've already seen 287 times get rerun on cable TV. It's already starting to happen right now. And I wrote a joke article, and it was a joke. that having scraped the bottom of the barrel for movies about the Nazis and Hitlers, they had werewolf Nazis and zombie Nazis, porn Nazi movies, Nazis on Broadway, and all this stuff. And I said, well, finally we need to, here's the last bastion of pushing that Nazi franchise at us. It's Santa Claus versus the Nazis. And I was taking my inspiration from one of the world's all-time worst movies ever made, Santa Claus versus the Martians. And I made up a joke poster. And I decided to reprise that article today because, again, we're seeing all this, oh, Nazis and Hitler, and, you must feel sorry for the aggressors here because that's what's going on. And so I reprised the article, and much to my shock, somebody's actually doing it. They're trying to put together a project, Santa Claus versus the Nazis, for theatrical release this coming Christmas. These purveyors of the Nazi Hitler franchise know no shame at all. They're desperate to just find another reason to get Nazis in front of you. Apparently the IDF is pushing for a new law against defamation of the IDF. In other words, when the IDF goes into a Palestinian village and they blow up a whole bunch of civilians, you're not allowed to talk about it anymore. You will go to jail if you dare mention Israeli barbarism because it's sanctioned by the imaginary playmate in the sky here. Iran, of course, is urging a probe into Israel's aggressions against Syria, which is exactly what it is. We know that Iran is taking it to the United Nations right now. It'll go to the Security Council, and the United States is going to stand up and go, veto, 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 veto. Israel never does anything wrong. We must stand by our friend. And isn't it kind of embarrassing as an American to see our entire government grovel like that and whore themselves to Tel Aviv and sell out the last vestiges of moral legitimacy? To go on saying, oh no, it was Assad did the chemical weapons and Israel would never do anything bad. Even though we now have the Chief of Staff of Colin Powell has come out and saying that this whole chemical weapons thing is probably an Israeli false flag. Now there's a very alarming story that came out earlier today. This was reported by Press TV, where Syrian militants captured the UN peacekeepers in the Golan Heights. And I'm not sure that's what happened. I would suggest these militants are actually Israelis getting rid of the UN observers so Israel can do something they don't want to be observed. Israel has this long history of targeting UN observers. They did it in Lebanon. They were shelling the locations of the UN observers to get them out of the way so the UN could not report on what Israel was doing in Lebanon. And now we're getting this report out of Press TV that Israeli armor, meaning tanks and other mechanized vehicles, are deep inside Syria, not the Golan, past the Golan, heading to Damascus. And that's a very good reason for Israel to want to get the UN observers out of the way. Very good reason for the American corporate media to just obsess about these 3 girls in Ohio and immigration and whether or not under the immigrant amnesty program if gays can sponsor their gay lovers in other countries to come to the United States of America. They don't want you paying attention to how they're ratcheting up this world war to save private central banking from its own design flaws. We're getting reports here from the Daily Star in Great Britain. British SAS Special Forces are preparing to go into Syria to aid the Al-Qaeda rebels. The war is on. The war is on, and they're still out there pushing all this nonsense about Assad and chemical weapons. The fact of the matter is, this was an unprovoked attack. Israel's entire justification for bombing Syria was Syria had weapons that they might give to Israel's enemies. That was exactly the same rationale Japan had for attacking Pearl Harbor. The United States was sending weapons to Japan's enemies. They were supporting China against the Japanese invasion. They were supporting the Dutch Indochina area against invasion. Remember the Flying Tigers and all of that. And because Japan was part of the Axis alliance, the United States, through the Lend-Lease program, was sending arms to the Axis powers' enemies. So this idea that Israel has a moral right to bomb Syria for potentially, there's no proof yet, potentially providing arms to Israel's enemies means that the U.S. government now feels Japan had an equivalent moral right to strike Pearl Harbor. That's how absurd this whole situation really is. Now, there is a story that is being floated around the net that Iran is sending troops into Syria. So far, it's all tracks back to one source, this really fluffy, very questionable website. When we come back from these commercials, I'll give you more details on that. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And a reminder, last year, President Obama made a commitment to Benjamin Netanyahu to get the war with Iran going by summer of this year. Summer is just about a month away. And Syria is the back door to war with Iran. And so, predictably, we're seeing this story starting to float around the net about how Iran is sending their army into Syria. It was picked up by a lot of outlets, including the Mirror over in Great Britain. But this story, even though the Mirror didn't credit the source, I tracked it down, and all of these go back to a single website. In fact, they're just quoting it directly. It's the same text wherever you see it on the web. And the website is called the People's Mojahedin Organization of Iran, although a Whois search lists the technical contacts for this website as living in France and California. Pointedly, nobody in Iran seems to be involved with this website at all. And it looks like another case of propaganda laundering. They set up a bogus revolutionary Iranian terrorist Al-Qaeda website. They put all kinds of lies on it that can be used to then sell more propaganda. That online terrorist magazine Insight is a good example. The instant they put Adam Gadon, whose real name is Adam Perlman, as a featured personality is what gave it away as another propaganda operation. So they're already trying to find some way that they can say, oh, this is all Iran's fault. Israel is claiming the missiles they targeted during their bombing raid came from Iran. Again, no proof. It's just Israel saying whatever they want to say. And what Israel actually really did bomb inside Damascus was a research lab, a lot of civilian infrastructure, a lot of innocent people, and a chicken farm. Those were Iranian chickens with cruise guidance, laser-guided egg-dropping things. Meanwhile, over in North Korea, the situation is ratcheting down. I think finally the leadership of North Korea realized they ought not give the United States an excuse for yet another war that the United States wants. North Korea finally realized they're the back door to war with China because we have to free the world from the tyranny of that gold-backed yuan and bring everybody the freedom of private central banking and debt-based currencies. North Korea has now withdrawn those medium-range missiles they were going to test. They've taken them down, put them back in the shed. And so that situation is winding down, and they're basically leaving the White House with nowhere to go about the Korean menace and the Korean threat. Remember a couple of weeks ago, oh, North Korea is going to set off a nuke above the U.S. and destroy our electronics and all the fear-mongering. None of that ever happened. It's just selling you another war. We're going to go to the phones here. Alex in Texas. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was calling because I heard you yesterday on that young gentleman's finance report, and I thought it was good to have you on Elijah's report because he's such a young kid and he's got a different perspective to offer to different to the youth. But I was also calling because I was wondering, you know, in studying this Adam Kokesh thing, that what he wants to do, the March on Washington. After hearing some of how what he's saying would take place, I could see how some people would want to join the march. However, I also see how it's a golden opportunity for an intelligence officer to subvert the Patriot movement. So my question to you basically was, do you think that this is a part of a bigger ploy to sort of have the crash of the dollar happen, or the crash of the market happen almost at the same time, so that, like, you know, for lack of a better word, all hell is breaking loose all at the same time?
Well, I don't think anybody is trying to plan the crash of the market and the dollar. The problem is they can't stop it because the very nature of private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is it has to collapse eventually. It is a pyramid scheme. Let me make this point here because we're almost to the commercial break here. I think the idea is the United States government is looking for some excuse to suspend the Constitution and to take away our guns before the crash happens, so that when the American people finally have to confront how badly they've been screwed by Wall Street and Washington, D.C., they can't do anything about it. Now, I've heard a lot of debate about Kokesh and his allegiances and so forth, and that's really kind of a side issue. Kokesh may be perfectly legit. He may see this as simply a publicity stunt to get his name in the media, and it's certainly working. His name is getting out there. But you're from the hard sell that we are seeing across the net, some of which are coming from known government shills, trying to say, oh, yes, we should go. You should take your gun and be part of this. It just reeks of a setup. And please, if you are even considering joining in this nonsense, all it's going to do is a couple of agent provocateurs inside that crowd to open fire on the White House, and Obama will have his justification for martial law, national emergency, suspend the Constitution, and start grabbing all the guns. Do not join this stunt. It is an open invitation to be cheated by the government. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, getting back to Benghazi. This is getting a lot of news coverage. Congress wants to find out what happened. I don't think they really care regarding Obama's role in it. I think this investigation is mostly being pushed by the GOP, which sees Hillary Clinton in 2016 as very difficult to beat. And they're still smarting from 2008 and 2012 when they made the mistake of destroying the candidate the rank-and-file GOP wanted and foisting McCain and Romney on us. And they still won't admit to themselves that railroading Ron Paul out of the primaries is what cost them the elections. They don't want to admit that to themselves. But they see Hillary as a major threat in 2016, and I think there's definitely a political motive behind this investigation, which is fine. Let's get the truth out. I don't want Hillary running in 2016 anyway. So we were reporting yesterday on how the deputy of the U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens, who was killed during this whole Benghazi operation, has gone public telling the congressional investigators that the special forces who were on their way from Tripoli to Benghazi were ordered to stand down. And this supports my theory that Benghazi was supposed to be this stage-managed, phony crisis. Oh, Al-Qaeda has kidnapped our ambassador and let the drama build, and then Obama sends in the SEALs, and they get the ambassador back alive, and Obama looks like a hero for the election. Because when this all went down, the polls were showing Romney slightly ahead. And so I think it was just a botched PR stunt is what happened there. So Clinton is still trying to avoid having to testify as to her role in what happened in Benghazi. And I imagine there's a great deal of friction going on between her and Obama about this right now. Now, last year, we had this piece of propaganda called Zero Dark 30. It's been described as revenge porn. And it was enshrining as the official myth how the SEAL team went in and got Osama bin Laden. And of course, it's complete fiction. The real Osama bin Laden died of natural causes in late 2001. Every Osama since then has been proven to be a fake. All of the photos that were leaked out onto the internet to prove that they got bin Laden turned out to be very poorly done fakes. If those people had been in my class over at UH Manoa, I would have flunked them for the poor quality of the work that they did. Now a declassified memo is showing that the Central Intelligence Agency was directly involved in shaping the narrative of Zero Dark 30. Catherine Bigelow has sold her soul to the dark forces. Of course, she did that before with Hurt Locker. And the dark forces repaid her by getting her the Oscar and snubbing, which to me was a far superior motion picture, Avatar. But there's nothing new here. Intelligence agencies have always been using Hollywood for propaganda, and there are far too many people in Hollywood who are willing to sell out. It goes all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover trying to get Charlie Chaplin to stop making movies that showed government officials as oafish buffoons. And Chaplin told Hoover to go jump in a lake because that was what Chaplin's audience wanted to see, government officials as oafish buffoons. And years later, as head of the FBI, Hoover used his influence to help get Charlie Chaplin's citizenship revoked and kick him out of the country. That's how these things get played. Now, turning to the economy, Charles Hughes Smith, this is being reported over Investment Watch blog, is saying the Fed has directly created a neo-feudal renter economy and society. He's absolutely right. When everybody is plunged into debt, nobody has any net worth outside of the 1%. Everything that you need in life, you wind up having to rent. And you spend tons and tons of money and you own nothing. You are just permanently renting. That's what feudalism was. The lords owned all the land, and you were mere tenants and serfs and workers. And that's where the money junkies are trying to take us back to. They don't like this idea of private property ownership of the masses. They need to own it all. They won't feel complete until they own it all, and everybody's reduced to being serfs. Under the original American system, prior to the creation of the Federal Reserve, the model was the people own the land. Under this neo-feudalism system that is clearly coming into being, the land owns the people. And that is a repeat of what we saw back in the Middle Ages. The land owned you. The noble owned you. You could not even leave the land without the noble's permission. Now, getting on to money junkies in government, the Internet sales tax has passed the United States Senate, apparently with bipartisan support. Vote of 69 to 27, 21 Republicans voting in favor. And there's a list out already of everybody who voted in favor of it. But before the Internal Revenue Service starts getting all hot and bothered that they've got more money to grab here, I'd like to remind everybody in the United States Senate about Article 1, Section 7 of the United States Constitution. And I quote, "All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills." In other words, the Senate has no business passing an Internet sales tax. The House has to pass it first, then the Senate can concur. So once again, in their lust to grab more money from you, the United States Congress is in violation of the Constitution. They did that on TARP, remember? The House vote on TARP failed. So the Senate passed a TARP bill and arm-twisted the House to go along with it. That was unconstitutional, a clear violation of Article 1, Section 7. They're not following the rules any longer, and you need to understand something about that Constitution. That is the original contract with America. It is the conditions and the rules under which we, the people, allow the government to manage our nation for the benefit of we, the people. If the government does not want to abide by that contract, they are free to resign. But they're not allowed to break the rules. They're doing it all the time. They're flying all these trial balloons to suspend the Constitution. Oh, government would work much better if we didn't have all these civil liberties things to trip over. Same exact rationale that Hitler had for the Enabling Acts. That's clearly where they're going. They don't want the Constitution. They don't want the rules of the Constitution. There's a very clear reason why the Founding Fathers put that in the Constitution. Because they understood that the House of Representatives represented the American people, who are struggling to pay the bills, struggling to get by, working for a living, and the Senate inevitably would embody the rich, just as it did in ancient Rome. Or just as it did in the British parliamentary system, the House of Commons, ordinary people, versus the House of Lords, the money junkies. And the Founding Fathers understood that you dared not give the money junkies, the rich, the power to impose new taxes and raise revenues. And they reserved it to the House of Representatives. And in passing their own Internet sales tax bill, the Senate is in violation of the Constitution. Period. End of discussion. It's illegal. And remember, United States Supreme Court, Marbury versus Madison, laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. Now, over in Russia, President Putin has signed the law banning all government ministers from holding foreign bank accounts, from holding foreign assets. The ban also includes the wives and the children of the ministers. And Putin is very smart to do this. He wants to tie the fortunes of the politicians to the prosperity of the nation in which they are ruling. This is a mechanism which says if you as a politician want to prosper, the only way you can do it is to make the nation prosperous. To return to Henry Ford's wisdom. It's a system the United States should have adopted 100 years ago, because it is all of these offshore accounts and offshore foundations and all the rest of it by which bribes to members of Congress are being funneled. So it doesn't show up on embarrassing paperwork, and they finish their term in office and they retire someplace where they can play with all the money they've accumulated from foreign sources into these foreign bank accounts. Putin is very smart. He has watched what it is that brought down the United States of America, and he's determined to avoid those same mistakes. So, tip of the hat to Putin on that one. He's got the right idea. Now, the ex-chancellor, Lord Lawson, member of the Tory party, is now openly saying it is time for Great Britain to leave the European Union. He's saying the economic gains from delinking from that nightmare Ponzi scheme bank would substantially outweigh the costs. Now remember, there's an interesting little piece of history regarding Ponzi scheme banking. Back in the 1700s, the Bank of England was a private central bank which the colonials were ordered to borrow banknotes from at interest for all commerce. That was what led to the revolution. If you read the writings of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, that was what caused the revolution. We fought a revolution to be free of private central banking. Now, eventually, Great Britain, rather than allow their nation to collapse, nationalized the Bank of England. So it's now a state bank, one of the few that seems to be tolerated by the private central bankers, and it's nationalized. So Great Britain is basically saying, okay, what's being linked back to a private central bank, the ECB, is not working. We want to go back to a system that works, which is a state central bank. And of course, the instant they do that, it's going to start triggering some of these credit default swaps that Wall Street has been selling recklessly against Europe's debt and do not have the cash reserves to make good on. No problem. They're just going to turn around and take whatever they need to take from you. Once they get the guns, they're coming after your gold and silver, maybe even your jewelry. Anything of value you have will be confiscated to save Wall Street from their self-created Armageddon. Now, I want to talk a little bit about all these stories we're getting in the news about computer hacking coming up here. And this was a story that we saw over at Washington Times about how jihadis and hackers joined forces to launch cyber attacks on the United States of America, targeting the banks and U.S. government agencies. This is all coming from the Department of Homeland Security, which is sort of the centerpiece of this whole security industrial complex. And then we're getting this story that came out today. The New York Times is saying U.S. directly blames China's military for cyber attacks. And of course, China has already officially denied this, and we understand why that would be the case. Cyber criminals use long chains of compromised computers to conceal their true origin. This is why the U.S. government can't find those people pouring porn ads into our mailboxes. So any claims to know for a fact that China is behind these attacks is absurd. All you can definitively state is the last computer in this chain is located in China. But that doesn't mean China is culpable. Now, what is far more likely, now that we're starting to see all these cyber attack stories and all the rest of it coming out there, is the U.S. government itself is preparing to crash the computers of the financial system when it reaches the point where they can't keep it propped up any longer, no matter how much of your savings accounts they take. And they're going to do it to duck the blame for mishandling the economy, for turning a blind eye to all of Wall Street's crime and fraud. Nobody's gone to jail for the mortgage-backed security fraud. Nobody's gone to jail for LIBOR. And deduct the blame for selling the American people back into the slavery of the same private central banking scheme we fought a revolution to be free of. Politicians and money junkies as a class of human beings are unwilling to accept responsibility for their actions. And they're desperate to find a scapegoat to put the blame on. It's Iran, it's China, it's Russia, whatever villain they want there. The villain is right there in the private central bank, issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, a system which by design always produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt. And when that system starts to fail and there isn't enough money to pay all debts, it literally forces our society to become predatory against each other, brutal. Everybody's scrambling to find those little pieces of ink and paper to pay their debts. And we start predating on each other. This private central bank, besides destroying the country, it's destroying what is best in human nature. And of course, the ultimate predation, when we can't find any more ink and paper in our neighbors' pockets to loot, is to invade neighboring countries and take their wealth to try and pay back to the private central bankers. And that's where we are right now. It's this horrible three-step system. Once that private central bank starts issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that private bank than actually exists. And the situation never changes. No matter what they do, whether it's quantitative easing or TARP or the rest of it, every time they issue more currency, it's just another loan at interest. And the debt always grows faster than the available money supply until the debt is unsustainable and the system comes crashing down. And now that they can't keep the crash off any further, and they're getting desperate when they're looting your savings account, now they're looking to frame somebody. The crash wasn't because of the pyramid Ponzi scheme central bank. It wasn't because of all the Wall Street fraud. It's an act of war from those dastardly insert name here, and we are going to invade them tomorrow to teach them what for. And so that's what I think is going on with all of this sudden talk about cyber attacks on the banking system. They're getting ready for a virtual 9/11. So they can walk away with all of their accumulated loot and put the blame on some innocent third party, Iran or China or Russia or whatever. It's another fraud. That's all this government knows how to do. Fraud, lies, and deception. They can't actually do anything useful. We saw that following Hurricane Katrina, following the Gulf oil spill. They don't know how to deal with a real problem. But they're great at solving the problems they've invented out of thin air to sell you a solution to. By the way, a little side note. The LIBOR price-fixing scam cost $110 million just in the state of Oregon alone. I'm sure Oregon is feeling the pinch of that lost revenue. Has anybody been arrested for masterminding LIBOR? Of course not. They're bankers. They're above the law. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we have often talked about the very obvious overconsumption, gratuitous adornment that typifies your money junkie. They want to have it on display, how much money they have, and we've run stories about these $150,000 wristwatches that they love to wear, the $200 hamburgers that they were chowing down on Wall Street that actually had gold leaf on them. Talk about decadence. And, all that loot they take from you. What do they do with all of that? They pile it up in the living room and just roll around on it naked and have orgasms? Well, sometimes. But they love to go out and buy things just because they are expensive so that they can brag, look, I paid whatever. And I think a good example of that is this piece of what is called art. It's titled Orange, Red, Yellow by artist Mark Rothko. And it is a canvas with a red background and a splotch of yellow at the top and two splotches of orange below it. looks like maybe he just picked up the drop cloth that he spilled paint on and put it in a frame and sold it. Anyway, it's certainly not something I would care to have in my house. It just sold at Christie's at auction for $86 million. And I know whoever bought it didn't buy it because it says something to them or it communicates an idea. They bought it so they could hang it on the wall and say, I spent $86 million for that. And that, I think, tells you all you need to know about these money junkies. They buy things just because they're expensive. And there are artists and jewelers who are out there who are going to come up with the most gaudy pieces of nonsense they can and put a huge price on it because they know somebody will buy it just so they can say, I spent blah, blah, blah on it. Bugatti Veyron, good example. Not exactly a practical car. But the money junkies like it because it says, I have arrived. I don't know. I'm perfectly happy with an Audi myself here. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the gun grabbers. Because they're back doing their full court press. The money junkies are never going to sleep soundly until the 99% are completely helpless and disarmed. And there's this very interesting story. This was reported over at newsforge.com where a 7-year-old boy was suspended from his school for pretending a pencil was a gun, pointing the pencil at another student and going bang, bang. And he was suspended from school for 2 days. We've seen a lot of that stuff going on here. Then we contrast it with this other story. This came out of khou.com, where a teenager raped a 4-year-old student twice. And not only did not get arrested and thrown in jail, he did not get expelled from school. No suspension, nothing. Apparently pretending a pencil is a gun is a far more serious crime in this country than raping a little kid twice. That tells you how skewed everything is. Got to take a break for station identification. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get further on the gun grabbers, I forgot to mention at the top of the show, Pepe Escobar is going to be joining us in the top of the next hour to talk about current events and what's been going on here. So you might want to set your phasers to record or whatever for that little situation. Now, we're hearing from all across the United States about these so-called gun safety drills in which government gunmen will arrive at a school unannounced, just walk onto the campus and start firing blanks all over the place. Latest one is the Pine Eagle Charter School. Now, this kind of a drill doesn't teach anybody how to respond to an unarmed intruder. They're not notified ahead of time. They're not told ahead of time, when you see these people, this is what you do. This is pure and simple propaganda to traumatize the children and the teachers, so they'll all run out and say, oh, we got to block the guns, we got to take away the guns, we've got to be... When we ban all guns, everything will be just fine. The police will take care of us, which I'm sure is what those 3 girls in Ohio were thinking for the last 10 years. It's just an attempt to scare people, to traumatize them, to link the image of guns with being afraid, to condition them, to look at a gun and react with fear, unreasoning fear, irrational fear. That's what the purpose of this exercise is. Ooh, gun bad. Quick, run and tell the police that this person has a gun. And that's all it is. Now, what I want to know is, what is the government going to do the first time one of these surprise machine gun exercises triggers a coronary in one of the school staffers? Or when a piece of the wadding from the blanks actually hits a kid and puts his eye out? Because blanks are not totally harmless. There's a little piece of hard cardboard or plastic inside that barrel. Some of them, they simply crimp the barrel closed. But I've worked with these on film and TV shows. Little bits of that crimping break off. They're metal. They will come out of that gun barrel at a high rate of speed, and they can still injure people. But it's a small price to pay to terrorize the population into hating guns. And I understand why the government is doing this. They've been glorifying guns for 10 years. Guns against Iran, guns against Iraq, guns in Afghanistan, drone strikes, blah, 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 blah. They've made war look glamorous in order to boost recruiting, and now they're trying to come back and say, you know, guns are bad. You know, unless the government hands it to you and tells you who to shoot, guns are bad. That's what these exercises are about. They're not actually teaching these schools how to deal with an armed intruder. They're shocking them. They're traumatizing them to condition them so that they will have a gut-level negative reaction just seeing a gun. That's what this is all about. We're going to grab a phone call here. Michael in North Carolina. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael.
Aloha.
No, I had a scenario that happened 2 weeks ago where, kind of keying into what you're saying, I had a firearm that had something that I couldn't fix. Normally, I can fix everything on my firearms, but this particular part I could not fix, so I was shipping it.
Yes.
So I went to a pack and ship. I'd never sent a firearm for repair before.
Yes.
I keep mine in good condition.
Yes.
So I went to a pack and ship, and I said, hey, I need to ship something. And the clerk said, well, what
okay,
do you need to ship?
Michael, we got to take a break for commercials. Do not go away. When we come back from the commercials, I want to hear the rest of this story. We'll be and Aloha America, welcome back to the show, and we're talking with Michael in North Carolina, and when we left off, you were taking your gun that needed to be sent in for repair to a pack and ship, and they told you...
Well, it's not what they told me, it was the reaction that I got, because there was a line of like 3 or 4 people behind me, and then there was the clerk, and when I got up there, my gun was in a case, and I opened up the case, and I said, she looked at it, and I swear to God, everybody in line and the clerk, totally freaked out look on their face.
Okay.
Like I was just going to load it right there and just take everybody out.
Yeah, well, that's what all the brainwashing is resulting in. Ooh, guns are bad, you know.
So I told the clerk, I said, listen, I brought this here, I need to ship it. So I'm going to show you that it's unloaded, and I'm going to put the zip tie through the barrel so that you know it's unloaded. I said, yeah, I need to ship it. And she literally, I thought she was going to call the cops. I really did.
Mm-hmm.
I thought she was going to call the cops. But I was like, listen, sweetheart, this gun is not going to do anything that I don't tell it to do. You understand that? I said, I'm a weapons expert. Not going to do anything I don't tell it to do. It's just an inanimate object. I just want to ship it. It's unloaded. You can see that. I've proved it. And one woman who was about, third or fourth in line actually left. She actually left.
Mm-hmm.
She was that scared of an inanimate object.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It was a surreal experience. I couldn't believe it. And maybe it's because I'm so familiar with weapons, but I don't know.
Well, obviously you're dealing with people who are not familiar with weapons. You know, of course, at my age, growing up in farming country, weapons are a fact of life. They are useful tools to varmint the garden with, and so I'm not going to have a negative shock reaction to seeing a firearm. But for people who grew up in the cities and they're subject to all of this brainwashing that we've been seeing for years now about how guns are automatically bad and have no legitimate purpose and guns equal crime and terrorism, yeah, obviously you're dealing with people there who have fallen for the hoax. They've fallen for the propaganda. They drank the Kool-Aid. And it is a problem. I remember talking with one of the weapons masters I worked with on a TV show. And this was a guy who had a federal firearms license. He had all the paperwork for all of these weapons that he would bring to be used on these movies and TV shows. They were modified to fire only blanks. They couldn't even fire live rounds. There's a new device called the Ungun, which are exact copies of guns that fire these electrically fired pyrotechnic charges that are very safe because you can't put a live round in there. And these came into vogue after, what's his name, Lee got killed during the making of The Crow. by a stupid mistake by the prop master. And he says even still, people are constantly calling the cops and saying, oh, he's a gun nut, he's got all these guns, and the police will come over and they'll look at the paperwork that says this guy's legitimate business is firearms for motion pictures and television, and they still harass him all the time.
Yeah, it's I have a very liberal wife, and she was not all too enthused with my gun collection.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? When we actually sat down, and because we have a little one in the house, and I'm like, you need to learn how to use these, and I need to show you. So once she put her hands on it, and once I explained it to her, like, she's a very smart individual, but once I explained to her the mechanics of the weaponry, she wasn't scared of it anymore. It's not something that she was like she couldn't touch anymore.
Yeah, that's how you demystify. That's why I think, all of our kids should go through a gun safety course, even if they don't themselves own a gun. Just say, this is what it is, and you're going to avoid circumstances where some kid just finds a gun that was carelessly left out, and they mishandle it. And again, that was my experience growing up. 12 years old, you get a gun on your birthday, and you get the lecture on gun safety. And, when I was a kid, everybody had guns. They even took them to school, left them in the cloakroom, because on the way home from school, you would stop by the garden and you'd chase out the varmints. And that was just part of life. And we didn't have mass shootings. We didn't have drive-bys. We didn't have any of that stuff going on. We didn't have, people being kidnapped and held for 10 years. We didn't have any of that stuff going on because there was a gun to hand. And that was just a fact of life, and it acted as a deterrent here. I went through the same thing with my lovely wife, Claire. When I met her, she was completely inexperienced with firearms, and when I met her, we still owned some modern firearms, which I took her out and taught her how to shoot, and she's a good shot. And once she handled them and was able to shoot, and it stopped being a problem. The fear went away. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're starting to see the government come down on these very accurate reproductions sold in hobby stores. Remember, we had the, I think it was TSA confiscated a shipment of plastic recreated AR-15s that shoot these little tiny pellets with the lame excuse they could be converted to fire live ammunition. And, of course, it was a lame excuse. They don't want anybody to have a direct, non-threatening experience with guns. So they're going to send in these thugs to the schools to shoot up the place with blanks, to traumatize everybody, and then not let you actually experience a gun for yourself, where you might decide, hey, it's the people, not the guns. I'm sure right now that Zokhar Tsarnaev is, running around saying, why are you blaming me for Boston? When it's a mass shooting, you always blame the guns. Boston was the fault of the pressure cookers. And, again, they're trying to demonize guns and traumatize America so that we always have that gut fear reaction to the presence of a firearm. But, again, all you need to deal with that is, you touch and you handle a gun, you fire off a few rounds, you learn gun safety. First and foremost, how to handle them safely. It is a tool. It's a dangerous tool. But, once you have that experience, the fear goes away. And that's not what the government wants.
By the way, I'll leave you with one thing. You tell the beautiful Lady Claire that women are better natural shooters than men.
I found that one out for myself.
All right, take care, Michael.
All righty. I like to joke that the secret of my wife and my happy marriage, and we're coming up on the 21st anniversary of the day that we met, I like to joke that the secret of our happy marriage is matching his and hers assault rifles, because we're just so polite with each other and careful. And it is a joke, because we don't own those kind of weapons any longer. But when we were still actively shooting, she was a very, very good shot. Anyway, so getting back to what's going on here, I'm going around the channels on the corporate media. All the big news networks, they're still totally focused on this Ohio story. These 3 women were held for 10 years, and they've arrested the suspects. And this is all they're talking about because they don't want you paying attention to what's going down in Syria right now. And apparently nobody at the corporate media understands that this story of these 3 women held for 10 years is an epic police fail. And it is an argument for legalized concealed carry. If just one of those 3 women had been carrying a concealed handgun, this whole thing never would have happened. But the gun grabbers, yeah, it's okay. They got held for 10 years and they got raped and one of them had a child and everything. That's preferable to having women able to shoot their attackers and abductors. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. George in Hawaii. Aloha, George. Aloha, brah. What's up?
Oh, Mike. How you doing?
Doing good.
Hey, listen, when I went to school in Hawaii, I attended the same school that Mr. President Obama attended.
Yes.
And we had compulsory ROTC. We had an armory on our school.
Yes.
We had M1s, we had BARs, we had 45s. They were on the campus. We were trained. We had a gun club, or whatever you call it, that fired 22s at school.
Yes.
On the campus.
Yes.
Now, I wasn't particularly enamored with ROTC, but I can tell you we had racks of M1s and the 14s and the BARs, all totally not in use anymore. But we would break them down. We would learn how to reassemble them. We would oil them, grease them, and it was part of our academic training. Now, if you didn't take ROTC, you couldn't graduate. We were taught how to handle weapons. We marched with weapons. And I don't get this stuff. Weapons were on the campuses, locked down in armories. And the school here that's up on the hill near you, Kamehameha, they were actually underwritten by the United States military.
Mm-hmm.
They wore uniforms to school. They carried guns to school. Not carried them, but they were in their armories. And, I mean, now you get the guy wants to send a gun in the mail and he ends up stirring up an entire store. I mean, it sounds ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. But, and it does show that the gun grabber propaganda is, you know, affecting that segment of society that is still plugged into the corporate media.
Hey, every Wednesday, Michael, I went to school in an Army uniform with a patch, and I had ROTC. We had drills.
Mm-hmm.
Period. And I don't know what's going on today. I don't know if they still do that. But as I said, I hate to be redundant and repetitive, but we had an armory, full-blown armory.
Yeah, my high school, we didn't have an armory, we didn't have ROTC, but there was a shooting club on campus.
We had a shooting club also.
They had a shooting club, and I remember, I can't remember the name of it, but there was actually a program at the end of World War II, and I'm really reaching back into the dusty corners of my memory on this one, but there was an actual U.S. government program after World War II that took a lot of those leftover surplus rifles, and they were giving them to schools to encourage the teaching of gun safety.
Absolutely correct, Michael, on that last statement, and shooting in school was competitive.
Oh, yeah, well, that's the reason. We got to take a break for commercials. Thanks an awful lot, George. Okay. We'll be right back.
Okay, Mr.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at this very strange story on Fox News where they finally left off these 3 girls in Ohio, and they've gone back to the Boston bombing, evil Muslims and the rest of it. And they had the comment that Secretary of State John Kerry is in Russia, somehow involved in this Boston investigation. I think it's a serious misuse of the Secretary of State, who is not a trained investigator, I might add, but it was reported in other sources, mostly in Europe, that John Kerry is actually in Russia to try and pressure Russia into staying out of the Syrian situation. Because remember, Syria has already stated, if the United States invades Syria, they will come in on the other side and turn it into the new Vietnam. I imagine Secretary Kerry is getting a very chilly reception from Russia, just like Netanyahu went to China to try and pressure them to stay out of the mess, and apparently he got a very chilly reception there as well. Now, getting back to the gun grabber issue and how desperate they are to do this, again, I want to talk about this Adam Kokesh situation, where he's talking about a group of American citizens with loaded firearms meeting in Virginia and marching into Washington, D.C. to the White House as a demonstration of our Second Amendment rights. And I'm seeing a full court press to sell this idea all over the internet. And some of the things that these obvious government shills are putting out there really don't make a lot of sense. I read one comment where it says, well, we know the government will do a false flag whenever they need one, so we may as well go ahead with this even if they're going to turn it into a false flag. That is one of the lamest things I've ever heard, of course. Now, I don't want to get into what Adam Kokesh's motives are about this. He may see this simply as a publicity stunt that is going to get his name in the media, and it's certainly succeeding at doing that. But there is absolutely no question that a armed march into Washington is exactly what the government is hoping to use to take advantage of, to demonize all gun owners, to suspend the Second Amendment, to call for a complete and total gun ban all across the nation, except for those drug gangs that are getting their guns from Fast and Furious. This is a mistake, and I cannot say it strongly enough. Do not get involved with this. The U.S. government needs a violent uprising to suspend the Constitution, declare martial law, and basically bring about this dictatorship they've all been joking about since George W. Bush. And if they cannot get a real popular violent uprising, they're going to create one, and that's what this looks like to me. The only way we're going to be able to head this off is if nobody shows up in Virginia, except the government agent provocateurs, to a grand total of 5 people with guns marching into Washington, D.C., they can't turn that into a general national threat of all gun owners and all Second Amendment advocates. Do not get involved with this. And again, look at what happened back during Vietnam with this peace riot that turned violent at Disneyland. And it turned out, during the COINTELPRO hearings into the FBI's actions that were held by Congress in the 1970s, it came out. This was an operation by the FBI. They had their campus informants on all the Southern California college campuses, and if you're going to college, yes, the FBI has informants around you right now. And these informants had gotten into the anti-Vietnam peace movement, and they said, hey, we're going to organize a mass peace march in front of the Disneyland park. And once they got everybody down there, these leaders of the march, meaning the FBI informants, led them inside, caused property damage, took over Tom Sawyer's Island, were smoking dope on Tom Sawyer's Island in full view of the press cameras. The next day it was headline news all across America. These so-called peaceniks had trashed Disneyland, an American icon. And it destroyed the credibility of the peace movement in one simple, swift operation, and it was ordered by the Nixon White House. This is how these bozos like to operate. And this Kokesh march into Washington, D.C. is virtually the same thing. We're going to have a peaceful demonstration of our gun rights on the streets of Washington, D.C., and then the organizers or the infiltrators will turn it violent, and Obama will have his case for banning guns from all American citizens. I guarantee you that's what the agenda here is. Because we're seeing this full court press to promote this all over the internet, all over the blogs, all over the independent media. Do not fall for this. It is a classic setup. Now then. So, moving right along here. Okay, I think we have a caller on the line. Tony in Connecticut. Aloha, Tony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Mike, I agree with you on everything you said about the Kokesh March, but I'm calling about a guest that you had on several months back regarding, personal debt. I hope I'm not too far off topic, but I'm kind of in a jam. I've been living off my credit cards and
okay,
paying my rent.
Tony, just stay with me. We got to take a break for commercials. I'm sorry. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Tony in Connecticut, and Tony's obviously in a situation far too many Americans are dealing with right now. Tony, would you give us a quick overview of your situation?
Yes, Michael. Well, I have a failing business. I lost my job due to the manufacturing downsizing in this country several years back. I was selling CNC equipment. Anyway, I've been living off my 401k and IRA and retirement funds. Now I'm at the point where I'm I'm probably a few months away from being homeless, Michael. I'm not looking for sympathy, but I'm looking for just a game plan. I've been using my credit cards to buy food and too proud to go for food stamps, you know, and I've been paying my rent with my food, with my credit cards, and now I'm basically using one credit card to pay another credit card, and it's sort of catching up with me. And I'm trying to avoid bankruptcy, but I don't see any other way around it. I wish there was, some way I could write some letters to these creditors and, get them off my back a little bit. And I know you had a guest on a while back that, that helped with that. I don't know if I went on your website. I go on your website all the time, but I didn't see anything.
Well,
so, I just want to know.
You're talking about William Shaw, and the sad news there is that he is no longer in that business. The company that he was part of apparently broke apart for reasons that are still not entirely clear, and so they're out of business, and you're going to have to go out and look for some debt assistance, probably one, that's being run as a charity and doesn't charge you, because there's a growing problem with a lot of these debt repair firms turning out to be completely fraudulent. In fact, apparently there was this one called Mission Settlement Agency, has just been indicted, Michael Levitas and 3 employees, for systematically exploiting and defrauding people across the country. And it's just another way the money junkies have of grabbing the last few pennies out of your pocket when you're struggling with a situation the money junkies, created for you to be stuck in.
I see. So I guess that's not an option for me, this company. So I'm going to have to just do more research.
Yeah, I wish I had something to give you, but at this point I don't, because Bill Shaw and his company, they are no more. Bill Shaw has gone on to doing other things, but he's not involved in that kind of a business anymore.
All right. Well, that's fine. That's okay, Michael. I appreciate your help and everything you're doing, and I'm sure, I'll work it out. We've got bigger problems in this country than my little problems. So I'm not
actually, your problem is the problem with the country. And it's kind of interesting. There's a movie that's been out. It's on cable right now. It's called In Time. It stars Justin Timberlake. And it is a wonderful metaphor for the current economic realities of this country. And it's a science fiction film, and the idea is that wealth is determined in lifespan, and you have this little clock that's in your arm, and your wealth is how much time you have on there. And they keep making this statement throughout the movie over and over again: for the few to live forever, the many must die. And it's really a metaphor for the Federal Reserve System. For the few to be rich, the many must be poor. And the reality, the reality is, when you have a banking system that creates more debt than money to pay that debt, when the 1% have all the money, it means that the rest of the nation is impoverished and in hopelessly unpayable debt. It is unpayable by design, and it results in situations just like Tony was saying, and so many other people who have called into this show are dealing with. By design, the money to get you out of your debt does not exist. And that really is the tragedy of our time, and that's why I was saying earlier in the show, this private central bank scheme is destroying what is best in our human nature. It forces us to be predators on each other, like this Mission Settlement Agency that was making their money by cheating and defrauding people who were in a panic, unable to pay their debts. And we've seen the same thing with these companies that want to solve your tax problems, and they'll take your fee up front and they'll do nothing for you. It's just another way that we have been dehumanized by this private central banking scam. Tony, I'm going to let you go here. I wish you luck. I hope something breaks for you. Because we're just seeing this over and over. And by the way, don't be proud. If you can get food stamps, get them. You're in survival mode right now. Okay?
Yeah. No, I am.
Okay, hang on. Tony, don't hang up, because apparently we've got a couple of callers on the line, and I'm going to take the calls out of sequence. I'm going to leave Jason until after we're done here. Let's go to George in Texas. George, do you have some advice for Tony? George, are you there? Okay, let's switch over to Mark in Georgia. Mark, are you there?
Yeah, what you might want to do is write this down, knockoutcollectors.com, I believe it is, knockout, like a boxer knocked somebody out, knockoutcollectors.com. That's with Dave Mack, and not only are they dealing with debt collection, basically nullifying debt, annihilating debt, they're also in the process of suing debt collectors for breaking federal law and getting a lot of money that way. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. No, that's great. Knockoutcollectors.com. I like what you're saying. Yeah, because
yeah, I mean, one of the things that they've done, I've gotten some money, badly needed funds, but because basically debt collectors have had a nasty habit of pulling people's credit reports when they do not have a lawful, legitimate reason to do so. And so they, basically sometimes you just file suit, or first off, you got to warn them that you intend to file suit, and sometimes that's enough for them to say, here, we'll write you a check to make this go away. And other times you actually have to file suit, and once you file suit, sometimes they say, oh, crap, we're going to have to hire a lawyer to deal with this, and it's cheaper to settle. And you can appreciate that. But their knockoutcollectors.com is helping people to basically hold these debt collectors accountable because, as you know, the whole system's a scam. So if we can use the law against them, that's all the better, right?
No, you're absolutely right, and that was what Bill Shaw was doing, is recognizing that most of these debt collectors are openly breaking the law and hoping you, the consumer, won't realize it. And when you call them on it, basically they'll say, it's going to cost us more to fight this than to simply write off the debt, and they'll write off the debt. I've just posted a link to that website at whatreallyhappened.com so people can go in and take a look at that. And, Mark, do you have anything else, or can we go on to another caller?
Well, I'm just, I'm now washing dishes, to pay my bills, and, so I can sympathize. I will be checking out about this open source, tracker and people that are making various things that, it's kind of like the Linux operating system, but in terms of mechanical stuff. And once I find out more about this, I'll get back with you about people saying we can do anything they can do, we can do better. Amen?
Absolutely. Time to decentralize there. Tony, stay on the line because we're going to go to George in Texas, who also has some information for you. George, are you there? Okay, I guess we lost George, and...
I'm on now.
Oh, you're on now. Okay, George, you have something for Tony?
Yes, if you go to Republic Broadcasting website, there is a story that's on Republic website. You look up debt collection agencies. You search the term, and there's a good story in there about how to make the debt collectors go away. I mean, it worked for me. I have portfolio recovery harassing me over a debt that's over 10 years old. I'm thinking about filing suit with them because they never stop calling. They won't stop calling. So I'm going to be filing suit with them. With that information in there, you'll be able to get it. Mike, I'll look up the page and I'll ship it to you. I'll email it to you.
All right. Well, yeah. Send me the URL and I'll definitely post it because I couldn't find it just in my quick perusal. Tony, again, there's some options for you to look at, but it is important for everybody who's dealing with this kind of a situation to understand that these debt collection companies do routinely break the law, and they figure most people won't notice it and they'll get away with what they're doing. And if you find out they've broken the law and you countersue or threaten to sue, usually they'll take the path of least resistance and they'll simply write off the debt. And the advantage with writing off the debt through that process is it does not generate a 1099 to the IRS that says, you now owe taxes on the forgiven debt. Okay?
Oh, that's good to know. Yes. Michael, thank you so much. Bless you for everything you do. And I'm going to follow up on what the other caller from Texas said about that website and do some more homework. But thanks so much, Michael.
You got it, Tony. Good luck. I hope it works out for you. And we're going to go to Jason in Ohio. Aloha, Jason. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I got a couple gun grabber stories for you. I don't know if you heard, I guess Mission College, I think in California, yesterday, went on lockdown. because some students in I believe it was a sociology class or something, had a little skit they had to do where they had to dress up as robbers. And one of them had a cardboard cutout of a gun that someone saw and reported it to police, so they had to lock down the whole campus.
Oh, my.
Yeah, I'll send you that article if you want later.
Yeah, please do. I want to put it up there. We got to poke fun at these people.
Yeah. The second one was a local story that happened last night where apparently a relative called the police saying that their teenage relative was despondent, whatever that means, sad, depressed, whatever. And then because there were guns in the home, they decided they had to send out the whole SWAT team. So at 11 o'clock at night, the SWAT team pulls up, gets on the bullhorn and starts screaming at the kid, we're the police, we're not leaving, and all that. And then eventually he just comes out. I mean, a threat to use a gun. There was no anything like that. He comes out and he shrugs, and he finally lays down. And they're saying no charges will currently be pressed, but they're thinking about charging him with inducing panic.
That is just absurd. That is really absurd, And again, the government wants everybody to have that gut fear, panic reaction merely on seeing a gun, and this is the result. Again, you're being brainwashed. You're being brainwashed to go, ooh, it's a gun, I've got to be shocked. And the whole purpose of that, it's the same reason you're taught to be shocked at certain words, profanity, so that people who wish to control you can use those words or show you a gun and shock you into ceasing to think about what's going on and go on your gut programmed emotional reaction. And it's just another tool of control. Okay?
Yep.
All right.
Well, there's no doubt there was some panic induced, but it wasn't by the kid sitting in his house.
No, it's being induced by all these bozos running onto the campuses with blanks and their machine guns and, pretending to shoot up the place. That's what it's all about, is to literally program in that gut-level fear response to guns. And that has nothing to do with gun safety or deterring school shooters. If you want to stop these school shootings, you start banning these SSRIs. Because every one of these mass shootings the gun grabbers are waving at us were either on or withdrawing from these psychoactive medications. The pharmaceutical industry has literally drugged America with a very dangerous chemical. These SSRIs are more dangerous, cause more violence, murder, and suicide than whatever the guy down there on the street corner is selling out of the back of his van.
Agree with that.
All right, anything else, Jason?
Well, I got a couple of suspected SSRI stories that have not been confirmed or anything, but I work at a private college here in Dayton, Ohio. You can figure that one out if you look into it.
I'm sure.
And within the last month, we've had two separate kids jump out of 6-story windows. One of them survived, one didn't. And, there's no explanation. It could have been just, I'm failing out, that kind of thing. But I strongly suggest that these kids maybe were feeling a little depressed and got a little chemical.
Oh, they hand these medications out like candy because it's a big, big money maker. And, dead kids, that's just part of the cost of doing business here. All right, Jason, we're going to let you go, and it looks like the phone lines are open right now. And again, getting back to the idea of scams, families of one of the Newtown victims from that, gun grabber show and tell here, has discovered that there are online websites in the name of the victim claiming to be raising money for the families, and of course the families are saying, no, we're not getting any of the money. It's another fraud. So you've got to be really careful. We are a nation that has sold its moral compass in exchange for pretty pieces of paper with colored ink on them. And as I was saying earlier in the show, this need to find the pieces of ink and paper to pay our debts has destroyed the better part of our human nature. And we have become predatory against each other and against the rest of the world. And it is an inevitable consequence of this system of economics that produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt. So you got to be careful out there. I don't go for these organized charities. Claire and I, we do our charity right here, first person, feeding the hungry, getting involved in these other programs. We go out there, we do the work ourselves. That way, we're sure we're not dealing with some kind of an overhead that turns out to be a scam, and there are a lot of scam charities out there right now, and because of budgetary restrictions, the government isn't looking too closely at these operations any longer. Alrighty, so let's see. Got a caller who called in, and again, this is for Tony in Connecticut. Go to lulu.com and search Become Debt Free Now. You're looking for the name Greg Manarino. Seems like an honest individual there. And we're going to go back to the phones. Kathleen in Iowa. Aloha, Kathleen. We're almost at the commercial break. I may have to keep you over the commercials. What's on your mind? Hello, Kathleen. Are you there? Okay, I guess not. And we're going to go to a commercial break here in a few seconds anyway. So if she comes back, we'll take her in the next segment. Very alarming story that came in. Republican introduces bill to require political approval of scientific papers. And when we come back, I will tell you why that is such a disaster and cannot be allowed to stand. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here. And before we take the phone calls, and we're going to have to rush because we've got Pepe Escobar coming up here in a few minutes, we have this Republican, Congressman Lamar Smith of Texas, is trying to introduce a bill to require political approval of all scientific papers, the rationale being that if there are federal funds involved in the research grants, and that's about 96-97% of all research here in the United States of America, that the government has the right to politically review the results of the science study and decide whether or not the public would see it. The immediate implication being that any research that questions global warming would not be allowed into the public, and it calls to mind that horrible disaster back in the former Soviet Union involving a gentleman named Trofim Lysenko, who came up with this Lysenko method for forcing winter wheat to always germinate in the spring. It was politically approved. It was mandated for all farmers in the Soviet Union. Second generation, the seeds refused to germinate. It triggered the mass famines, which resulted with the Soviet Union having to buy wheat from the United States of America. Okay, apparently Kathleen is back, ready on the phone. Kathleen, aloha, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi. Sorry about that earlier. I just wanted to make sure that lest we forget, a caller months ago on RBN brought it to my attention, and Eureka, that by diagnosing a third of our kids already with some form of mental illness, that will preclude them from gun ownership in the future. And when you consider all the adults that have been diagnosed or treated at some time with some form of mental or emotional condition, that it will be a rationale for keeping guns out of the hands of that entire population. And I see that coming up through Obamacare and these national registries, but don't lose sight of the fact that that is going to be a huge caveat for controlling who gets guns.
Well, you know, I think anybody who is on SSRIs or antidepressants ought to be banned from service in the government or corporate leadership, because some of the decision-making we're seeing coming out of D.C., they're doped up, beyond all question. Got to let you go. Got one more phone call to get to before the top of the hour. Steve in Virginia, aloha, what's on your mind?
Yes, hi. I just was wondering, this situation with the Middle East seems like it's, of course, escalating again. Do you think that this could go into an all-out a major war?
Absolutely. That's what the U.S. wants. The U.S. wants to force the world back onto the Bretton Woods Agreement of only using the U.S. dollar for international trade and reserve currency, and ultimately it will bring us into war with Russia and China that do not want to go back to Bretton Woods.
Yeah. Do you think that if things escalate quickly enough that would, how would you say, keep the dollar, the U.S. currency hanging on for a time before going maybe to a new currency, as you mentioned, later on?
I see the Federal Reserve wanting to keep the dollar just exactly the way it is. What's going to happen in the long run is very much unpredictable at this point. Most of these people plotting for this dollarification of the world they're clinging to articles of faith that this is all going to work out exactly the way that they want. but I seriously doubt they can achieve it, mostly because in this coming world war, the United States is probably going to lose, and that means some other currency will then become the global reserve and trade currency. And I'm opposed to that idea. I think nations should trade their currencies directly between each other. That's freedom. Okay, thanks a lot, Steve. We got to take a break. We'll be back with Pepe Escobar after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to hour number 3 of our show today. Dan the Man is now sitting in our control room handling all of the technical troubles that keep coming on there. And joining us on the line is Pepe Escobar. He's a Brazilian investigative journalist. He's lived in L.A., Paris, Milan, Bangkok, Hong Kong, all over the place. He's written for Al Jazeera, MichaelMoore.com, The Nation, Huffington Post. We've linked to many of his articles from here at WhatReallyHappened.com. Pepe, thank you for spending time with us today.
Greetings from North London.
Greetings from North London. Well, greetings from Oahu, Hawaii. We're literally a planet away from each other. And
this is great. Aloha.
Aloha, nui, nui, nui. And I know we'd sort of talked about earlier about what we wanted to talk on the show, but things are changing so fast. I'm going to put you on the spot here. What do you think's the most important thing going on in the world right now?
Well, the wider Middle East, in fact, geographically, Southwest Asia. That's the right way to call it. We Westerners tend to call it Middle East, just like a lot of people here in the UK still call Asia Far East. This is completely absurd. So everything that is happening at the moment, the center, of course, is Syria, related to Iran, related to the petro monarchies in the Gulf, related to Iraq, to Lebanon, to Turkey, the relationship between NATO and the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, uniting all the 6 petro monarchies. It is the hotspot. And I think we are at the beginning of what could become a regional conflagration. I certainly hope not, but as independent journalists, we have to look for truth. We have to know which way the wind is blowing, literally. And after this latest Israeli attack, unprovoked attack, in fact, defying international law, once again against Syria, all options are open, in fact. It's absolutely horrible. This was supposed to be a plan C or plan D, according to NATO and the GCC. By the way, the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, the 6 petro monarchies, they are an annex of NATO nowadays. So what is decided in Washington and is followed roughly by NATO is also followed by the GCC. But within this very uneven coalition, there are different agendas. For instance, the Saudis, they want in Syria Wahhabi emirates, extremely intolerant, preaching a 7th century version of Islam. This would be their ideal post-Assad environment. Qatar, they want the Muslim Brotherhood in power, which would be something similar to what we have in Egypt at the moment with Morsi, but much more complicated because the sectarian divisions in Syria are enormous. They are cosmic, in fact, and there's no way after a bloody civil war of over 2 years you can conciliate the interests of Sunnis, Shiites, Alawites, Christians, Kurds, and other minorities as well. And obviously, this is all expanding to Iraq. I would say what's going on in Syria nowadays is a tangential consequence of what happened in Iraq 10 years ago with shock and awe. And now we have Jabhat al-Nusra, for instance, which is only one among many jihadi groups. They are back and forth in Syrian Iraqi desert. And Iraqi commanders who were fighting the Americans in 2004, 2005, 2006 in Al-Anbar province in western Iraq, now they are commanding jihadi brigades inside Syria.
Okay, Pepe, we got to take a break for commercials. We're going to be gone for about 3 minutes, and when we come back, I'd like you to pick up pretty much right where you are right now. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Pepe Escobar. And Pepe, you were in the middle of basically giving us the overview of what's going on over there in Southwest Asia, a.k.a. the Middle East.
Absolutely. Look, there's something very important as well, Mike. Sheikh Nasrallah, Secretary General of Hezbollah, he was in Iran a few weeks ago. It was supposed to be a secret visit. It was not, because then they start leaking some photos. Some incredible photos, in fact, of Sheikh Nasrallah standing up side by side with Ayatollah Khamenei from Iran. And the message of these photos, not only to the Middle East, but for the rest of the world, was very clear. Like, if you attack Iran, you attack Hezbollah, and vice versa. No wonder, a few days later, there was this Israeli attack against Syria. The Israelis are very worried that Iran is still sending really, really hardcore weapons to Hezbollah. We don't have any proof or any confirmation or no conclusive evidence from anywhere, any of the players, that Hezbollah, for instance, has bought very good Fateh 110 missiles from Iran, which, according to Israel, were the target of this attack. Mm-hmm. Even if they didn't buy these missiles, they have other missiles. They are the M600s that they have Syrian technology. They are almost as good as the Iranian missiles. So if there is a next conflagration between Israel and Hezbollah, they can also use it. But the Israelis they are desperate because they don't have perfect intel on Hezbollah capabilities. They would love to strike at the same time Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran. They cannot do it. Only the U.S. can do it. The Obama administration, they are not crazy to start another war in the Middle East. In fact, the debate before the Israeli attack a few days ago was Obama has a few options. One of them would be more lethal weapons for the rebels. In fact, the rebels are receiving a lot of weapons from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and the CIA sells the myth inside the U.S. that they are controlling all this. They're not. This comes from all sorts of sources. This could be bought in the black market. This could be bought in Ukraine, for instance, and shipped from Croatia. In fact, there were a lot of stories in American corporate media about these shipments from Croatia. And now there's another story here in Europe that surfaced 2 or 3 days ago. The Brits and the France, they are going to work together. They are, in fact, the Brits, they are de-escalating in Afghanistan. They are sending their special forces to Syria or to the Turkish-Syria border, because these special forces are going to organize the shipment of a new batch of lethal weapons to the rebels. So this proves, among other things, that, okay, Saudi Arabia and Qatar are involved, the Brits and the French are involved, the CIA is involved, and still Bashar al-Assad government is over there in one piece. Why? Because there are no major defections, army defections in Damascus. The people who control the Assad system from Damascus, the capital, to Aleppo, they're still there. The business classes in both Damascus and Aleppo, they still support the regime because they profit from it. They have, for instance, facilities to trade with Russia, with China, with the rest of the Middle East. They're still doing business, and they are protected by the regime. So the least bad option for, in fact, the majority of Syrians from all sides, including Sunnis, some of these business classes, they are Sunnis as well, is the least bad option is still Assad. Of course, we cannot defend the Assad government because it is a hardcore police state. I've been there many times, and it is almost as bad as during Saddam. But how you're going to replace the Assad regime? Post-Assad, nobody in the Obama administration knows what could happen. The Turks, who were supporting the rebels, they start having second thoughts a few months ago. The Europeans have absolutely no clue because they don't have local intel. So it could be either the Qatar option, which is a hardcore Muslim Brotherhood government, or the Saudi, what the Saudis want, which is a Wahhabi emirate. Both options are absolutely disgusting. And if we look at what the rebels have been doing, especially the jihadi faction, Jabhat al-Nusra especially, they were beheading people in Aleppo. People in Aleppo who, in the beginning, they were supporting the rebels, they turned against them. They were saying, look, these people come here, they occupy our houses, they treat us very badly, they destroy our city, which was the case with the souk of Aleppo, the market. It's one of the most beautiful souks in the whole Middle East. It's been there for 2,000 years. Was basically destroyed because the rebels took refuge inside, then they burned 80% of the souk down when they were retreating. This is the equivalent of the Taliban, blowing up the Bamiyam statues in 2001. It's the same thing. So they have the rebels have only localized support inside Syria. Very poor Sunnis in the countryside, near the borders, the border with Jordan or the border with Turkey. But this is not a legitimate national insurgent movement at all. There was a component of urban young Syrians in the beginning, over 2 years ago, that wanted a better, of course, not a police state anymore. They wanted some measure of democracy, and they were looking at what happened at Tahrir Square in Egypt. But they were completely sidelined because foreign powers intervened. And when I say foreign powers, it's not only the U.S., especially the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Turks.
Well, can I insert a comment here? Because, for all the talk about Saudi wants this form of government in the post-Assad Syria and Qatar wants this other situation, you need to remember that all of those nations in the Middle East that are oil producers are financially entangled with the United States of America because of that petrodollar deal. And if the United States dollar were to cease being the default oil currency for the world, demand for it would drop, and all of the accumulated wealth of Saudi Arabia and Qatar that is invested in the United States of America would lose the majority of its value virtually overnight. So there is a very strong financial motivation for these nations to go along with the U.S. agenda against these other oil-bearing nations. And that financial entanglement, I think, is a major factor for what's going on. But when you talk about these options for a post-Assad Syria, I think the real danger for the United States, and the U.S. government doesn't seem to recognize this, whoever comes in to replace Assad is likely to be very unsympathetic to the United States of America, and they could easily, because of this adventurism, wind up with a Syria that is even more antithetical and opposing to the United States than Assad was.
You're absolutely right, Mike. It could be, in fact, it could be a mix of hardcore Wahhabis and hardcore Muslim Brotherhood as well. There are different strands of the Muslim Brotherhood. Some of them are extremely conservative and extremely intolerant as well. And these people could be in power. When you look at the composition of the Free Syrian Army, there are no Kurds, there are no Christians. You only have different strands of hardcore Sunnis. And by the way, this is extremely interesting. Guess who's going to meet this Thursday in Washington, D.C.? Chuck Hagel, the Israel lobby, and two top commanders of the Free Syrian Army. They're going to decide what to do next. So this proves once again that the Pentagon is in the middle of the whole thing. The Israel lobby is in the middle of the whole thing. They are all supporting these absolutely disgusting strands of the Free Syrian Army, who are now even going to Washington to get their marching orders, what to do next. And this whole thing is being organized by WINEP, which we all know is an arm of AIPAC. So it is an Israel lobby, Pentagon, Gulf Cooperation Council operation. So on the other side, we have what in the Middle East, a lot of people in the Middle East, including the Arab Street, in many places. I would say, if you want to talk to Jordanians outside of government interference, or if they see that there's nobody watching them, they have a profound admiration to what they call the axis of resistance, which is Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, and of course parts of Iraq as well, represented by the Maliki government. obviously, from the point of view of the ruling elites in the West, the masters of the universe from Washington, Wall Street to Brussels, the city of, get rid of all these people, because obviously they are not totally integrated in the financialization system that we're living, which in Europe, where I am for the past, a social disaster of unimaginable consequences. But they still want to integrate these countries that are more or less outside of the system, especially Iran and Syria.
That's one of the most amazing things. I'm sorry to interrupt. We're coming up on a commercial break. But before we get to the commercials, we have seen how this private central bank model has destroyed the United States of America, and yet the United States is still trying to force this same system on the rest of the world at the point of a bayonet. We've got to take another commercial break here. We'll be back with Pepe Escobar after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Pepe Escobar, and we're talking about the deteriorating or escalating, depending upon your point of view, situation in Syria and the region. Is a wider regional war on the way? Yes. That's certainly the United States' intention. They have been trying to gin up this war against Iran. So has Israel. And they're using Syria as the backdoor to get that war with Iran. We're already hearing these propaganda that Iran is sending soldiers in to Syria. They're Iranian missiles. They're just trying to somehow create in the public mind a link between Syria and Iran so that they can basically continue this. The United States wants control of Iran's oil, so it's sold on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. Israel, of course, wants to smash any government in the region that is a potential competitor with Israel. They want to have Israel surrounded by lots and lots of little tiny helpless broken up nations like they did to Iraq. And it does look like we're really on the verge of a major escalation of this world war.
Yes, and one of the ideas for Syria is exactly the initial idea peddled for Iraq, Balkanization. In fact, for all practical purposes, Iraq nowadays is already Balkanized because the Kurds, they are practically living in total autonomy. They are starting to sell their own energy directly to the Turks. The south of Iraq, basically a Shiite-dominated, is still more or less aligned with Baghdad. But then there's the west, Al-Anbar province, which is majority Sunni. They are mounting a guerrilla, in fact, a new civil war, a guerrilla war by the Sunnis against the government in Baghdad has already started. And my friend Patrick Coburn from the Independent of London, he wrote us the best story summing it all up for the past few months. He wrote it just a few days ago. But what he said had already started months ago. The next step, assuming there is a post-Assad, for most of these gangs, the jihadis and outfits who are combating in Syria nowadays, there's no border over there. It's just a desert, in fact. I took that road sometimes, and it's fantastic. It's just a road in the middle of the desert linking eastern Syria to western Iraq. They'll be back to Iraq, and they'll be fighting the Maliki government. The consequences, assuming they are weaponized to death, which is going to happen from now on even more than before, you can imagine this in the long run. And for Syria, the original neocon idea expressed, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the first time they expressed it was in 2002, is also balkanization of Syria. If Assad or the Assad regime survives, they would be more or less isolated in the mountains near the eastern Mediterranean, where the Tartus base, which is the Russian eastern Mediterranean base, is, and the city of Latakia, where the Assad family has a palace as well. And then it will be the Kurds, which are already enjoying a lot of autonomy in the northeast. The problem is they are sitting on a lot of oil, so the Westerners never let the Kurds be autonomous in northeast Syria with lots of oil, right?
Yes.
And the Christians are desperate because they don't know where to go. If you talk to those guys in the old city of Damascus, there are a lot of Christian merchants over there. They are desperate. They say, look, even if we want to go to Europe, Nobody's going to give us a visa. We're going to be slaughtered over here by these hardcore Sunnis if they take power. But this would be the ideal extreme right-wing American solution, balkanization of Syria as well. And of course, Lebanon, the same thing. Lebanon is already more or less balkanized between Sunnis and Shiites. It will go on like this. And of course, the major prize, as our friend Dick Cheney would have said years ago, is still Iran. Mm-hmm. But there's nothing that Israel and the U.S. can do against Iran short of a major war. And obviously, Israel cannot do it, and the U.S. cannot afford it.
Well, that's never stopped the United States before. And, you know, I mean, we've already bankrupted this nation. We've had Russia basically sending diplomatic messages that incursions into Syria and or Iran, Russia will come in and simply turn them into the new Vietnam and wear the United States down in a war of attrition, which Russia can win and the U.S. cannot possibly survive. One of the reasons I am so adamant that we stop this thing before it goes any further is the United States doesn't have the men, the manufacturing, or the money to win a prolonged conventional war in Southwest Asia. And that means they're going to be tempted to use nuclear weapons. I think they're preparing to use nuclear weapons against Iran, and they're covering it with this cover story of the Moab bomb. Now, we're about a minute away from another commercial break. I don't want to keep you too long. How much time do you have with us today?
Let's keep going.
All right, we're going to keep on going there. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. If anybody has a question for Pepe Escobar, now is the time to ask it. Your knowledge of the region is phenomenal, and you certainly informed me of a few things I was unaware of prior to this situation. But you're absolutely right. Israel's goal, aided by the U.S., is to balkanize all other nations that might potentially be a political or economic threat to Israel. It's like what they did to the Ottoman Empire. They broke it up into all these arbitrarily designed instant new countries, and now they're going to break them up into tinier and tinier pieces so they are out of the way of Israel's dominance in the region. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with Pepe Escobar after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking with Pepe Escobar, and we have some callers waiting on the line with questions. Before we get to them, though, I think one of the reasons I tend to have a very dark view of the immediate future is it appears that the United States has literally bet the farm, meaning the economy, nation's credibility, its moral standing, on completing this process of dollarification across the globe. They have gone too far to turn around now and go back. And even though things are going very, very poorly in all of these invaded nations, and they're looking at Russia and China coming in on the other side, the United States seems to be fully committed to continuing this policy into Syria and into Iran. So we're going to go to the phone calls here, and we're going to start with Danny in South Carolina. Danny, do you have a question for Pepe Escobar?
I do. Aloha, gentlemen. I'll make it brief. Would you please weigh in on the Leviathan oil field and the involvement with Cyprus, with Lebanon, with the U.S., and all the players in that region?
That's a very good question, because these oil deposits, they are shared by a lot of countries in the Middle East, including Israel, Cyprus, Israel, and obviously, don't forget, Palestine as well. The thing is, who is going to control the exploration of maybe for Israel, this would be, the definition of energy independence. But we cannot forget that they have to settle their borders with Lebanon, for instance. As we all know, Israel has no definite delimited borders. So how can you start exploring gas in the Eastern Mediterranean when you don't even have borders with other countries? So this is very complicated. It could be ideal in terms of a push for energy independence and for exporting energy for all these countries involved, which should be synonymous of peace. But that's not exactly the case, because when we look at what's happening in the Caspian Sea, the same thing. They haven't decided if the Caspian is a sea or a lake, and there are still problems regarding especially the Russia and Turkmenistan, for instance, and Iran as well, or who's going to exploit what inside the Caspian. There's another thing that it's more or less parallel to the Eastern Mediterranean, to energy in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is one of the reasons why Turkey is against the current Syria government, which is the Iran-Iraq-Syria pipeline, which was agreed upon almost 2 years ago, a $10 billion project, which would bypass Turkey, would get to Syria, probably get to Lebanon as well, and sell gas via the Eastern Mediterranean to the Europeans. So everyone is now focusing on selling gas to Europe. Could be this collection of countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, including Israel, Palestine, not a country, of course, yet, Cyprus. Could be Iran, Iraq, Syria via their own pipeline. And if you talk to the Europeans off the record, they say, all these options for us are fantastic because then we could escape from the clutches of Russia's Gazprom, which is almost 30% of Europe's gas is bought from Gazprom. But how do you solve the political problems involved in all this gas exploitation? I don't see it happening for the next 10 years or so, at least. The problem is Western interests, big oil. They will have a stake in the Eastern Mediterranean, and they want to have a stake in Iran, Iraq, and Syria as well. And this complicates matter further because they don't want Gazprom as part of the picture. They don't want the Chinese major energy companies as part of the picture. They don't want the Indians to be investing because then they would need energy for themselves. Look, this is just the beginning of a major conflagration, you know.
All righty. Well, listen, Danny, thank you for the call. We're going to let you go here and switch over to Linda in Texas. Linda, aloha. Do you have a question for Pepe Escobar?
Yes, I do. So if Syria tries to defend itself from these Israeli attacks, is the U.S. going to come in then and attack Syria in defense of Israel? And didn't the Congress kind of give Obama permission to do that?
They did relative to Iran. There was a specific congressional resolution that the United States would come in and support Israel in a war against Iran, even if Israel struck first. And I think, obviously, they'll go back and say this applies to Syria as well. Pepe?
Exactly. And the warmongers, among them John McCain and the cohorts, they already are lobbying heavily for the past few months, in fact, for a no-fly zone over Syria. We all know what no-fly zone means. Just go back to what happened in Libya. If you have a no-fly zone, which will never be approved by the UN Security Council because Russia and China, they already said no 3 times, and they will say no the 4th time. And the US could unilaterally impose a no-fly zone over Syria, or they could go to NATO and ask NATO to impose a no-fly zone over Syria, bypassing not only the UN, but NATO itself, which is crazy. This is something I have been following here in London. The Brits and the French, inside the European Union and inside NATO, are the ones lobbying for a no-fly zone. Almost everybody else inside the EU is against it, especially the Germans. And the Germans are saying something very simple. Okay, if we do that, the jihadis are going to take over. How are you going to deal with that afterwards? And the other countries, they have the financial problems. I was in Spain a while ago. The financial problems in Spain, in Greece, in Italy are so huge. Nobody wants a new war in the Middle East. This is completely crazy. But, of course, if you talk to John McCain and company, that's exactly what they want.
Well, I think we ought to give John McCain an M16, a bright orange jumpsuit, a parachute, and drop him into Syria if he really feels that way about it. But I think we want to keep our kids at home. And part of the problem when you talk about these massive economic problems in Europe and the United States, it all goes back to the very nature of the private central bank in that it creates more debt than money to pay that debt. And certainly our own history is that every time the economy gets to this situation, they gin up a world war to get out of it or at least distract from it. So they've got the war to blame all the hardship and poverty and homelessness and hunger on. We've seen it before. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. U.S. has already invaded 10 countries on 2 continents, and they figure, hey, they fell for it the last 2 times. We're going to do it for, third time's the charm, as they say. Linda, do you have anything else for Pepe?
No, I don't. I'm just sorry that we have to be the bullies of the world.
Well, I'm in agreement with you on that one. I'm in agreement with you on that one. Linda, we're going to let you go here. Pepe, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners before we let you go?
Oh, my God, so much. We didn't even talk about the pivoting announced by Obama at the Pentagon over a year ago from the Middle East to Asia. In fact, what we're seeing now is that there's not going to be any pivoting. It's still the Middle East. At the same time, there will be more deployments of the U.S. Navy in the Arabian Sea, in the South China Sea, in the Pacific as well, as part of this pivoting. But the Chinese are already seeing what's going to happen. So the Chinese are playing. It's very, very clever. I wish we have more time, maybe next time, to talk about China's security and geopolitical aims for the next 10 years or so, now with the new presidency. They're going to lay low. They're not going to create any problems with the Americans. They want to solve their problems with their neighbors in Asia bilaterally, country by country. They won't be provoked into anything rash. They will concentrate in their internal development, now not anymore at 10%, but maybe growing 7% a year, but trying to establish a solid middle class in China. No involvement in wars. At the same time, they're globalizing their currency, the yuan. This is very important.
Yes.
In 3 or 4 years, we're going to have the yuan as a major global currency, side by side with the dollar and the euro. And in terms of the BRIC group of countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which are going to be joined sooner or later by other emerging countries. They are starting, or they have already started, to trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar. So the trend in the long run is the dollar decreasing in terms of trading value among developing countries, more countries bypassing the petrodollar, and this is where the crucial thing is, because when you have, for instance, China buying lots of oil and gas from Iran and paying in yuan, for instance, deposited in Chinese banks, for instance, for Iran to collect, bypassing the petrodollar, lots of other countries will start doing the same thing. Venezuela is one among them, one of the largest OPEC producers. Russia has been advocating bypassing the petrodollar for years now. So this is the thing to watch in the long run. We're going to have the yuan as a major currency all around the world, not only for trade, but trade in energy as well. And this will be the real beginning of the shift from the West to Asia. And obviously, these elites here in the city of London, in Brussels, in Washington, and New York, this is the end of the Western dominance, in fact.
Yes.
It's China to where it was until 150 years ago. And in fact, the cover story of The Economist this past week here in London was fantastic. They had a wonderful graphics of Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, with, sipping a glass of champagne. And, now it's back to 1793, which means that when the British went to China and forced the Chinese to open their country to international trade. Now it's the other way around. China is dominating international trade already. They don't have to force anybody. If you want to join the future, you have to trade with China, and sooner or later, you have to have your currency as the yuan.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And again, I think the main reason for this new militarism by the United States, the project for the new American century, was the recognition that as our nation abandoned its manufacturing, as we became a net importer of food and had little left over for exports, that the idea that nations were going to turn away from the dollar, they were going to abandon Bretton Woods, and Bretton Woods and the petrodollar was pretty much the majority forces holding up the value of the dollar internationally. And as these other countries go to direct currency exchanges among themselves. Demand for the dollar drops. More nations are selling their natural resources for currencies other than the dollar. Demand for the dollar drops. And so they're literally looking at reasserting the dollar dominance through force of arms across the globe. And the rest of the globe is definitely not interested in that, which is why we're seeing this escalating militarism. And something I like to tell my listeners all the time to keep in mind is, before the creation of the Federal Reserve, there was no such thing as a world war, and now we're on the doorstep of big mistake number 3.
Very well put, Mike. That's it. You summed it all up in 2 minutes.
Well, that's why I get the little bucks. Pepe, we've got about another 4 minutes until the commercial break, and 4 minutes after that. What else do you want to mention?
Well, so very important, the yuan, the rise of the yuan, more coordination inside the BRICS group, which has already started after their last meeting in South Africa. The emergence of, I would say, very powerful non-allied countries like South Korea, Mexico, and Indonesia. Turkey is very complicated because Turkey, they want to be some sort of a neo-Ottoman power in the Middle East, but with Syria, they lost track of what they really want. They were trying to sell the Turkish model to the rest of the Middle East, but interfering directly in one of their neighbors when their official foreign policy was no problems with our neighbors. It doesn't make sense anymore. So Turkey, they still have to get their act together again, which something that they did 10 years ago. The emergence of Latin America, more integrated Latin America, it's very important. It's not the backyard of the U.S. anymore. Will be the end of the Monroe Doctrine for good. No wonder Washington was absolutely obsessed with Hugo Chavez, with all his faults, and he had many.
And the U.S. government is already out there saying that the new government in Venezuela is illegitimate. They're trying to find some way that they can fake a revolution in Venezuela, like they tried to do in Iran in 2009, like they're trying to do in Syria right now, to make it look like a popular uprising. But it's still a covert coup d'etat.
It's absolutely. They tried in 2002, it didn't work, and they're going to try again with the opposition. The opposition is basically financed and support by Washington. Everybody knows that in South America. You don't fool people in South America, especially after these past 10 years, because the level of political consciousness all over South America especially is very, very high. People learned when there was this pink tide of governments, center-left and leftists. They learned a lot. The new middle classes are very politically conscious as well. And in Venezuela, in Uruguay, in Argentina, in Ecuador, in Bolivia especially, where they have finally the indigenous population in control of what's going on in Bolivia, there's no turning back. And from the point of view of the old school elites in Washington, this is horrible. They've been saying for 10 years, now we lost South America. Well, sooner or later, they're going to lose the rest of Asia as well. Because Asia, even if the U.S. wants to play like Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Vietnam against China, China is the major trading partner of all these countries. You cannot do anything in Asia from now on without China in the picture. Nobody's going to, pick a fight with China. Forget about it,
Well, so, I'm afraid I don't agree with you on that one. I think the U.S. would be perfectly willing to pick a fight with China. At the very least, at the outset of war, the United States could say, hey, we don't have to pay back all that money we've been borrowing from China over the last 40 to 50 years. And I think the U.S. is willing to trade a few million American lives to simply write off that debt and to end the potential threat of the gold yuan as a rival to the dollar.
No, but the thing is, Mike, the Americans cannot instrumentalize Asian populations in a war, mobilize them in a war against China. This is out of the question. Even in Indonesia, which is a very large Muslim country, where the Chinese control a lot of the Indonesian economy, the Chinese diaspora who actually lives in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta.
Okay, we got to take another break for commercials. The United States could declare war on China, but not actually fight it, and still renege on the debts. And it's all about the political and economic isolation of China rather than a real war. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're almost done today. We're talking with Pepe Escobar. Pepe, we're going to have you back for more time down the road, but you've got 4 minutes now. Go. Do you have anything you want to say in 4 minutes' time?
Look, I was thinking about the end of an era, but it's going to be drawn out for perhaps many decades. I'm not even thinking in terms of years. I think it's the end of a system, of a world system, as Immanuel Wallerstein would describe it. But the new order is going to take a long time to be born. There's this transfer of power and influence from the West back to the East, where it was until 150, 200 years ago. There's the fight that is going to, the Western elites, they're going to put up a horrendous fight, and the collateral damage is going to be the middle classes in the Western world, the American middle class.
It's already happening.
Europe, yeah, this already happened. It's going to be much, much worse. I come to Europe at least 3-4 times a year, and every time that I come, it's more depressing. It's the end of the welfare state. It's the pauperization in an enormous scale, inequalities that you couldn't dream of in Europe, even in the 70s or during the go-go 80s, that are now flagrant everywhere. And at the same time, only when we look at the other side, like my neighbors over there in Asia, the Chinese, their system is more or less replicating our system and our mistakes. In fact, what we have in China nowadays is, I would define it as neoliberalism with Chinese characteristics, in fact. It is a neoliberal system with a very heavy state presence as well. But the fundamentals of the system are very similar to our neoliberalism in the West. Mm-hmm. So we have the same side effects and the same collateral damage. The working classes in China, collateral damage. We're watching the rise of a Chinese middle class, of course, but they are spending money that they don't have, just like we did and we still do in the West. They are consuming like crazy, so it's not a productive system at all. It's just based on, consuming, especially Western brands, which is completely absurd, right? And at the same time, they have to, inside the country, this middle class could have, let's say, 300 million, but in a country of 1.3, almost 1.4 billion, what are you going to do with those 900 million peasants? They don't want to live in the countryside anymore. They want to settle down in the cities and become middle class. There's not enough space for all these people. And the system cannot support, or it already cannot support these huge cities in China of 20 million, 34 million.
Pepe, I hate to do this to you. I have to pull the plug on you. The music is playing, which means we're at the end of our show. We are going to have you back on our show as soon as we possibly can, and so you can share more of this amazing and very important information with us. We have to shut down now. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until tomorrow, please make a point of going out and sharing Republic Broadcasting and what really happened with all of your friends, all those people asking questions. The answers are here. Bring them in. Thank you. Aloha, America.